Viewers waiting for.
Cool.
Okie doke. Yeah. All right. So we are live with Matthew Tabor of The Create Unknown and Vsauce2. You do the writing and researching and idea come-upping with Vsauce2. And today we are talking about The Last of the Mohicans. And you requested this a while back. And I finally got around to rewatching it. So we are doing it today. And thank you to everyone who is coming in. And I think that we're just going to open it up with a little bit of small talk just so people can come in and get settled. Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, like you said, I work on Vsauce2, which is primarily science and math and tech stuff. And also have the Create Unknown podcast with Kevin Lieber, who is Vsauce2. We talk about kinds of online creation and the creative process and all that stuff. So, you've got the science and math stuff on one hand, then the business and creativity on the other. But we rarely get a chance to talk about anything history related. We don't go too deep into things like cinema or TV or any medium. We don't get to go too deep into it. So I was pretty intrigued by your approach to all of this stuff, and I thought this would be a really good opportunity to talk about some of the things that I never get to talk about. And one of the films that I really like for so many different reasons, historically, stylistically, also contemporary relevance, which is strange given that this is set 250 years ago, actually more than that, 1757.
Yeah, during the 7 Years' War, right? French-Indian War.
Yeah,
yeah.
And actually, I want to seize on that to say something real quick about terminology. People are really quirky on this one, depending on what their angle is, right? Whether they're talking about the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, border warfare in New York used to be an accepted term, probably in the 1800s. It really depends on who you are and what you're looking, kind of the lens that you're looking through on this whole thing. And so I talk about this in French and Indian War terms. I use words like Indian as opposed to Native American and some of the other more specifics, just because that's the language of so much of the literature at the time. It's the language of James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote the whole story as part of the Leatherstocking Tales, which was a series of 5 novels surrounding the main character of Nathaniel. And so, yeah, it's tough because of that. The terminology is all over the place, but I like to keep it real simple and talk in the language of the original times.
Yeah, and it's funny here. I'm just looking up one of the guys' names. For some reason, my IMDb is stuck in French, so it's Le Dernier des Mohicans. But Russell Means, who's Chingachgook, I don't know how to say it, but he's the father. Michael Mann cast him after seeing him in the Wounded Knee protests. And
oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and and you talked about saying Indian, and that was a big thing that Russell Means, one of his big things is he preferred to be called Indian rather than Native American. And and he was just like, well, if you're born in America, you're Native American, but I'm an Indian. Like, it's an interesting thing, because obviously now it's like everyone wants to, the Create Unknown's in here. hey, how's it going? Obviously now everyone wants to make everything more politically correct, but if you're going to be like looking at history and how terminology was used and everything like that, and I mean, honestly, I don't think it's as. Oh, thank you, JUTV, for the $1 super chat there. But anyways, yeah. So, sorry, I hardly ever get super chats, so I'm a little thrown off.
That's cool.
Yeah. I got my first super chat on my birthday for $5, And
Nice.
he says, buy some gum. Okay. I don't know if that's an insult or not. um, yeah, JU, that Joker video is just for you, by the way. JU's a guy in my Discord. We'll get into voice chat, and he just sort of pops in. And he just sort of pops in and says random Joker lines, or he'll be silent for a while, and then he'll peak his audio laughing maniacally. So he's our resident Joker enthusiast. And yeah, so actually, if you don't mind, for the first just couple minutes, I do want to address some things about my Joker video yesterday. It's just gonna be about 3 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
So some people, so a few questions that came up, I wanted to address, a few very brief questions. Some people were asking me to link them to Turkey Tom's video about me. That video doesn't exist. That video is not real. He sent me an audio track that I wrote. So I wrote lines for him. He recorded it, and he sent me the audio. That video is fake. Another thing, people are asking if it's satire. It's sort of satire. It's sort of not. The parts of it that are satire should be pretty obvious. So if you don't get it, I honestly can't help you with that. And also, I don't think Joker's a perfect movie. I know that may come across in the thing, but the video is more addressing some what I thought were really stupid and shallow criticisms of the film, because there's a lot of discussion on it even now, and I find a lot of discussion to be boring and to be a lot of the same arguments and a lot of the same criticisms, a lot of the same defenses. And I just think that there's more to that film, and there's more to Parasite, which I opened up questioning Parasite, which I know turned some people off. I think I instantly lost 6 subscribers or something like that. I thought it was kind of funny, but I just think that with a lot of movies now and the whole YouTube landscape of film reviews, that everything has become so shallow and reactionary that you can't do a really good in-depth review of a movie, especially a newer movie, because for one, people they don't really sell as much now, and people don't really want that. And if a movie like Parasite, which is the #1 movie on Letterboxd, if you want to say, yes, it's called Over the Top. Oh, that's TCU. All right. But, especially these controversial movies like Parasite or whatever, if you try to say anything bad about it, if you try to give any kind of criticisms, even if you really like the movie, people sort of take that as an offense to themselves. And I don't get it, honestly. I don't understand that. And I think it has to do something with Baudrillard. Go watch my Truman Show video. I explained it all in that. I'm not going to... Anyways, that's all I have to say about the Joker video. Let's get into Last of the Mohicans. So, Tabor, your background is actually more in history than it is in science, isn't it?
Yeah, quite a bit more strongly in history. And my focus was, for many years, was on the time period that Last of the Mohicans and the universe that Cooper built around Nathaniel as Deerslayer, Hawkeye, the many names that appeared in the different books. That's an area geographically that stretches from really from Albany to the center of New York State. Okay, and it's really critical to understand what that area was about at this time, because that was absolutely the frontier. Albany itself, which, if anybody's not from the U.S. or not familiar with the New York and New England geography on this stuff, you think about Boston on the coast, and Albany is 150 miles to the west. Boston was well established at this time. New York City was kind of getting there, but Albany was at the top of the Hudson River in what is now New York. And the Dutch had it as Fort Orange, and when the English took over that area, it became Albany. Albany was really the most western kind of settlement at that time. And now when we look at kind of the lay of the U.S. and New York itself, like that's the extreme east of New York State. You know, there's this massive western expansion of New York State that really wasn't much of a thing at the time of Last of the Mohicans. So everything was kind of spouting westward from Albany. And it was a collection of little tiny settlements, individual houses. Towns really didn't exist west of that area. You know, it was there's kind of trading and settlement on the Hudson between Albany and New York, but the westward expansion was just happening. So this was the absolute frontier at the time, where it was mostly populated by Iroquois, and the occasional settlers. So there weren't a whole lot of established rules and boundaries. It was just called Old England District by the British government, and it was just kind of a mass of kind of almost like colony theory. You know, nobody really knew what was going on there because it was just woodlands with some waterways. Furs were, you know, they were a sought-after thing, and that kind of drove some of the activity there. But there wasn't a whole lot of established stuff, and that's where Nathaniel as a character fits in. He's in this middle ground in every possible way, from his identity as being a white man who was raised by Chingachgook to you know, to just his kind of general life and purpose. You know, he doesn't have a job or a specific role. He kind of hangs out and does his thing and lives his life in this weird middle ground. As in the east, the British expansion is happening, and Britain is figuring out what to do with what is now New York. And in the west, the Iroquois and further up north, Abenaki and Huron are figuring out how to play that white expansion in, which is partially British and partially French. And the French have a very different approach to relationships with the Indians and the land than the British do. So, yeah, it's absolutely an extremely complex developing frontier for every single person involved in the story. And that's really critical to kind of understanding how everybody plays it, you know, how everybody responds to each situation in that film.
Yeah, and each tribe had their own way of dealing with the European nations, and had, because weren't the Mohawks like merchants? As far as, I don't know, you probably know more about this than I do.
The Mohawks. So if you think about where the Mohawks are, they were around Utica in New York, which Utica is kind of the joke in The Office. It's one of the satellites of Dunder Mifflin. You know, it's kind of New York's version of Scranton. It's not a great city. It's right in the center of the state, about an hour from Syracuse. But that's where the Mohawks were, right in this kind of little breadbasket of central New York. And that put them fairly close to the English expansion. And they had a much better relationship with the British from early on. The Iroquois did. All of the Six Nations at that time. The Six Nations had just a well-established relationship with the British government, whereas some of the other tribes to the north and the south, they really didn't. There was a guy named William Johnson who took it upon himself to go west into the Iroquois land, close to where kind of Syracuse and the Finger Lakes are now, and really ingrain himself with the Iroquois. He married an Iroquois woman. It was really his mission to build the relationship between the crown and the Iroquois. So the Mohawks were a central piece of that relationship, and were pretty dependable for the crown in the French and Indian War, and eventually through the Revolution as well. That didn't work out quite as well for the Iroquois allying with the British there, but it shows how strong that relationship was.
Yeah, in talking about the Revolution, Michael Mann does show it in the film. The militia, or I don't know about the book. I haven't read the book. I've just watched the movie. But the militia fighting with the Brits, and you can see that in the French and Indian War and in the last Mohicans, they definitely made a point to show how distanced the British were from the people living there in the settlements. And of course, anyone who knows anything about American history knows that the taxes from the French and Indian War was a big reason that the Revolution even happened, and it kind of all sort of led to one thing or another. You're right, though. Michael Mann did
an excellent job of planting those seeds through the character of Jack Winthrop, who's the one negotiating on behalf of the militia and trying to raise the levy for the crown. Mm-hmm. When all of his interactions with General Webb and Major Hayward and just everybody on the British side, there's that discomfort with their authority. There's asserting the independence of being settlers. There's a super complicated relationship of being subjects to the crown, and you can see just in all of that dialogue that it's not very smooth. It's not very reliable. There's an independent streak that's really going to be a problem later on. It's a small thing in this film, but you're totally right that you can watch this and know down the line it's going to get a little bit more strained before it gets better.
Yeah, I mean, especially after Monroe tells them that they can't go back to their settlements, and then half the militiamen pretty much abandon the fort, even though they're told, we'll kill you if you abandon the fort. And then they're like, all right, the ones who don't abandon the fort will provide cover for, like, the rest of the militia people will provide cover for them. And it's that I think they say in there, like, that they don't trust the English law anymore, that the British themselves aren't.
They don't know.
Yeah, that the British themselves aren't upholding it because they promised, they made a deal with them and they broke it. And yeah, no, it's interesting how he kind of sets all of this up, especially with American settlers being killed. Their settlements are being killed by Indian war parties, and the British are not allowing them to protect their own places. And of course, Michael Mann shows us just how brutal these war parties can be when they go back to the the cabin that we sort of start off in the movie, and we see the kid dead, the women dead, and pretty much everyone just slaughtered. And I want to point something out about something that I thought was really interesting, is that all of the buildings that they had to make for the movie, so the fort, the cabin, and like a few other buildings, they made those. They try to make those as close to the style, I guess, of that time. And I know that it's like, oh yeah, of course they want to make it close to the style of that time because it takes place in 1757. But like for the fort, they actually chopped down trees and used like those timber logs instead, to make the fort. And they did the same thing with the cabin. They didn't actually, I think for the cabin especially, they didn't buy any wood. They chopped down trees and they try to make it like the old-fashioned way to make it seem as authentic as possible. So I thought that was really cool. And another way that Michael Mann sort of transports us back to the past, to the early 18th century, mid 18th century, is that they didn't use any cinema lights in the film. It's all natural lighting.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so so the night scenes were lit by fire, and the day scenes were lit by the sun. And you know, the scene where Jack Northrop is negotiating with the British general inside the building, and Magua comes out of the shadows. The reason there's shadows in the back is because they didn't have lights, and the only light was the sun shining through the windows. And Michael Mann said, you know, he's like, well, they didn't have lights inside, especially during the daytime. They wouldn't have lights inside the buildings. And yeah, if you were far away from the window, you'd be in the shadows, and it would take you out of the film if it was lit up perfectly on the inside, because then it wouldn't be realistic to that setting. I thought that's a very interesting way of going about it, because I think that actually a lot of people don't really think about the lighting, you know, or like historical lighting, I guess. But It does make sense, especially for the kind of story that's being told. It's very much like on the frontier. And I mean, it's mostly natural light, if not all natural light. I'm sure that there are a few shots where they sort of faked it, but it was really difficult. I think also it was just difficult for them to get lights anywhere, because do you know how they actually found the locations for this?
No, I don't know how they settled on filming it where they did.
Yeah, so it's up in North. So they filmed it in like North Carolina, West North Carolina, and they filmed a bunch of stuff at the Biltmore Estate.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can thank Vanderbilt and I don't know, Anderson Cooper. He's a Vanderbilt, right? And but how they actually like found like their forest locations and that sort of stuff is they went into a helicopter. Now this was in the early 90s, so they didn't have GPS. They would fly around in a helicopter for hours, surveying the forest and putting down like markers, or like I guess on maps. I don't know. They were using early 90s technology that I'm not really too privy to, but they would find places that they from a helicopter looked really good. I think that's how they found like the waterfall, and that's how they found a lot of these like cliffs and stuff like that. And then they would have to go back on land and try to find these locations again, but again without GPS, without anything like that. And they wanted it away from roads. They wanted it away from pretty much like anything that would give away that it's anything that could interfere with it. So that fort really was in the middle of nowhere. And I think that's why the fort cost like $6 million to make, part of the reason.
Well, they did a really good job of choosing scenery that's faithful to the territory in the film. Because, again, on that geography side, this so Last Mohicans is, again, one part of 5 novels about Nathaniel.
Mm-hmm.
And they take place in kind of various spots between the east of New York and the west of New York and the center. This Last Mohicans happens to be on the extreme east. And Fort William Henry in the film, that's right on Lake George. So, you know, we're talking north of New York where kind of the Adirondacks begin to happen. You know, and the Catskills are rolling hills in the south of New York that kind of gradually increase in volume and height and turn into the Adirondack Mountains. And so Last Mohicans is happening kind of right on that border of hills turning into the truly mountainous stuff where you get you know, the scenes like at the end where they're chasing after Alice and Magua.
Yeah.
But there's a change in that scenery. They have to go from the rolling hills to the sharp cliffs and the crazy waterfall, which is just an epic thing. And it's very, very much like the actual terrain in that Catskill to Adirondack transition. And so it's kind of remarkable how well they chose all of those locations in North Carolina to have it match. I think I said this to you when we were chatting about the movie weeks ago. Like, the only gripe that I have is a little bit of like the vegetation doesn't match up. That like, what can you do there? Like I've spent a bunch of time in the woodlands where this is supposed to be set, and there are a lot of leaves and bushes and shrubs that Natty Bumpo and Uncas and Chingachgook are hiding behind that just don't grow in central New York. But aside from those little details, God, they absolutely nailed it. They absolutely nailed the scenery. It's really impressive.
Yeah, and they said that they didn't go with the original location because it had been like used for lumber for so long that the forest didn't look like how it would have looked at that time, and they wanted to go with someplace that looked closer to how it was at that time before a lot of industry happened. I'm trying to pull up a photo right now, and this might shock you a little bit. All right, is this photo gonna? I wonder if this photo is gonna work here. But there is a movie. There's a popular film that is weirdly very influenced by Last of the Mohicans, and I don't know if you would be able to guess it. It's a children's film.
You got to give me some hints.
It's a children's film. Yeah.
What else? Give me one more hint.
It's animation.
Oh, the likelihood of me knowing this is low.
Yeah, I'm gonna put the image up here, an image from that scene, and
okay.
Let me browse it. I'm gonna put it right here for everyone to watch once I can find it. I have a million folders. Which folder did I save it under right now? Okay, there we go. I see it. All right, I got all these pictures of Cumby on my phone, or computer. All right. So.
Well, real quick on the scenery part, like on the woodlands aspect between the woodlands in the Carolinas and in upstate and central New York, is there's a lot more undergrowth in New York, right?
Yeah.
And I think that would be absolute hell to try to film through it, because you've got these big trees, but loads of little saplings and brush and just things that get in the way. It would be virtually impossible to get a whole lot of clean shots. Whereas there's just not undergrowth in the way in the Carolinas nearly as much. So it kind of would have been a nightmare to do it faithfully.
It would have. And like that movie Annihilation takes place close to where I live, but I think that was the reason that they didn't shoot it here, is because our forest here is pretty much like impassable. It's we have so much undergrowth. And also in the summer it's it's like 100 degrees and humid and
right.
Yeah, it's just not fun. But the movie is Fantastic Mr. Fox.
I haven't seen it, no.
Oh, so there's a scene, they all get kicked out of their homes, burrows, whatever, and they have the waterfall scene.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is a funny, something I always find funny. I've known for a while that Wes Anderson has loved Michael Mann, because he puts Michael Mann references in pretty much every one of his movies. Rushmore was filled with Michael Mann references. He referenced Heat in Rushmore. I think he referenced Thief in Bottle Rocket. He always sticks in Michael Mann references. And Wes Anderson said a year or two ago, he was like, he says, people haven't noticed that I'm just trying to remake what Michael Mann films as comedies. So each of his films has a big-time Michael Mann reference, and The Last of the Mohicans was referenced in Fantastic Mr. Fox.
That's cool.
Yeah, the waterfall scene, so everyone can see it right here. Now I'm gonna get rid of it. And and that is an issue with shooting in the woods. A lot of like indie filmmakers shoot in the woods because it's a cheap place to shoot, and honestly, it usually doesn't work. I watched this movie called The Last House on the Left last night, the original, and that was shot mostly in the woods in Connecticut. I didn't care for it. I didn't like it. I know it's like a classic exploitation movie, but Michael Mann really does make it work. He makes all those all those places feel very epic and like grand, and how he shoots the characters is that he keeps, in a lot of his frames, he keeps them pretty small, like they look small in the landscape. And I know that he was actually basing his cinematography style off of a lot of landscape painting, and it definitely comes across in the movie that it seems like the camera is almost more interested in the landscape as a whole than it is in any of the characters. And of course it ends with the ending shot, them looking at the landscape, them looking west. And let's talk about the ending, spoiler alert, because I thought the ending was very interesting, because you have I know we're going to kind of go all over the film. It's not really like it's not like I have a point by point like what we're going to be doing, but so the last shot is them looking west, and Michael Mann said, and he said it's like them looking to the future, which I think is true. But it's also interesting who is looking west, where it's Chungachgook. Is that how you say it?
Chingachgook.
Chingachgook.
Yeah.
Hawkeye and Cora. And it's kind of like it's the Indian, the white woman, and then like halfway in between with Hawkeye, and it's sort of like looking at what the future of America is going to be like, what the alliance looks like, with kind of them melding into another. And I thought that was a very interesting ending. But in the book, doesn't Cora die and Alice lives?
Yeah. The book is so radically different from the movie. It's crazy. I mean, if you've seen the movie and think like, why would I, how is the book going to be good if I kind of know how everything turns out? Well, nothing turns out the same way in the book. It's just a totally different story. Colonel Monroe is not killed in the ambush. Which, by the way, Colonel Monroe was a real guy. So other people in this story are not real. But Colonel Monroe actually existed. He defended Fort William Henry. The ambush of the soldiers absolutely happened.
But it wasn't different
than.
But it wasn't of the soldiers. It was of the militia that were and the Indians that were trailing behind them, right?
Yeah.
Because what I read is, so I did a little bit of reading. I mean, I guess accidentally, because I wanted you to explain all this. But what I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the soldiers were being escorted by the French, but the militia and the Indians weren't, and they were behind. And actually, the soldiers didn't even know that the ambush had happened until after they finished their journey. I don't know if that's correct, but let me know.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is, and I may get a blip here because I just had to reconnect my Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
But I think I did it in time. It should be good. So the way it's portrayed in the movie is that Monroe surrenders Fort William Henry because General Webb doesn't come to his aid from nearby Fort Edward. That is 100% accurate in real life. So that part's good. In the movie, though, General Montcalm, the French general, kind of subtly directs Magua to attack the British soldiers after they exit. That is not real life. That isn't how it played out. Now, the concern, which makes sense in the movie and kind of sense in warfare is that if you let the British soldiers go and you give them a free pass to be out of the war for 18 months or return to England, whatever it is, are they really going to honor that? Or are you going to just be fighting them again in a different place? That's kind of the perpetual issue with that kind of surrender.
Yeah.
And so in the movie, Montcalm has a conversation with Magua that's off the books, and kind of says, like, it would be a shame if something bad happened to these guys. Mm-hmm. And that's the subtle green light. So Magua and the Huron, which Magua's only ever shown with like 15 or 20 as an entourage, right? But in reality, there were 2,000, Huron who were doing this ambush. They just set up a very opportune ambush that puts the soldiers in a position that totally negates all of their tactics, all of their training, any advantage they have, and they get slaughtered by the Huron. Well, what actually happened was the fort gets surrendered. Immediately, the Indian allies, which were a mix, more than just the Huron, I think it was Algonquin, Abenaki, the French had very loose alliances with the Fort William Henry siege. And the Indians just started kind of looting. I mean, they took everything of value from the civilians inside William Henry, and Montcalm tried to put a stop to that. He communicated the terms of this surrender very clearly to the Indian allies, and they didn't respect that. They did their own thing. And when the soldiers and the families left the fort, they just got swarmed on the back end of that train, of that kind of baggage train, with the Indians killing a bunch, stealing their clothes, stealing just anything of value. So it wasn't the strategic kind of military purpose ambush that's portrayed in the movie. There's a purpose to that. In reality, it was kind of just looting the stragglers and the people on the back end. And that's a theme of how the Indians approached the entire conflict. You can see it. You can see it in the brutality of that cabin massacre. There's really no distinction between combatants and non-combatants, between adults and children. It's really just a very brutal, personal kind of conflict. And if it's burning down a house, you do it. If you want clothes, you take them. It's a different style than what the British or the French are doing. And that whole thing played on through the French and Indian War, played on through the Revolution. The same area was just rife with pretty brutal conflict, with things like the Cherry Valley Massacre, which is a little settlement in central New York that the Mohawks came through under Joseph Brant and just kind of wiped out settlers. That was very realistically portrayed in Last Mohicans. Magua is, of course, he's got a certain strain of evil to him that's uncommon, but the brutality is a fine fit with reality.
Yeah. I mean, I think that especially in contemporary times, people do forget about the brutality of past wars, especially between Indians. And Magua, I mean, if you read Cormac McCarthy, you don't forget. But
the state of talking about kind of Indians in the border warfare, which, like, I call the kind of the New York conflict border warfare because that's how it was called, forever ago. But it's really important, especially if anybody outside the U.S. is listening to this. You can't talk about Indians or Native Americans like they are not one thing. Mm-hmm. They're not. What happened in New York and Pennsylvania, what happened with the Iroquois and the Delaware and the Lenape, and which is essentially Delaware. But it's a radically different thing from what happened with the Cherokee and the Sioux. Like, these all were individual situations. There's no one policy that swept through from the East Coast to the West and applied to all native tribes. Every single one of these things was intensely situational, intensely personal. The sheer number of circumstances that factored into why it played out a certain way with one tribe at one time, it's almost incalculable. So, it really always bothers me when people talk about, like, the U.S. did this to the Native Americans. Well, there were literally thousands of different situations. You can get some very general conclusions, and paint with a little bit of a broad brush here and there. But what was happening in the 1750s, which, number one, wasn't even the United States, but 1750s Iroquois, it has nothing to do with, like, what George Custer was doing 120 years later and 2,000 miles away.
Yeah.
That's really important to remember here, is that, it's intensely personal, and it's very hard to make sense of that. And this film does a better job of it, and the story of Last Mohicans by Cooper does a better job of it than most things do. And every single person in the movie has several different conflicts at several different levels, and their relationships with each other are all completely different. So Nathaniel and Uncas and Chingachgook, they have their own problems with the Huron. They are skeptical of the British, but they're also comfortable with the British, which is why they're okay with going to William Henry and helping Cora out. But they're also skeptical of Duncan Hayward. But there's a little nugget thrown in there when Nathaniel is talking to Cora about his background, and he said, when we were 10, Chingachgook sent us to Reverend Wheelock's school, he and Uncas. That's actually Dartmouth. Reverend Wheelock's school was the forerunner to what would become Dartmouth University.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's in New Hampshire, yeah.
Yeah, right. Dartmouth College rather than university, sorry. But that's such an early example of kind of mixing the cultures in a very serious and important way. It's not like some schoolmaster showed up and taught arithmetic in a schoolhouse kind of thing. No, Chingachgook sent them to essentially Dartmouth. That's a really unique relationship, right?
Yeah, it is. I also want to point out about
person, go on.
I also want to point out about is really Magua's evil comes from a personal story about his experience with the story is sort of a revenge story that goes wrong, because his revenge story, of course, ends up in his own death, and not by the hand of a gray-haired, but by the hand of Chingachgook, who kills him for killing his son. Everyone's talking about The Last of Us Part 2, right? For the don't do revenge, what was it? That was the thing that, that was the message of the story. But I mean, come on, the story is as old as The Last Mohicans. I mean, it's older than that. But but with Magua, it is interesting because not only does Magua want revenge against the gray hairs, against the British, he essentially wants to be them. If Magua had his, like, in Magua's perfect world, he would be the gray hairs enacting the same atrocities on the Hurons, but but the Hurons would be as big as the UK or as big as the British, and the British would be as big as the Hurons. And he didn't really want peace. He he didn't want to be the oppressed. He wanted to be the oppressor.
Right.
And that, and it's interesting because I think that a lot of people who are still sort of like that, where they're driven by a rage of maybe something that happened, and they're not really driven to wanting peace, but they're just driven to wanting to be the ones that inflict the pain. And I think that that is his prerogative. But I have a question about his character, because he starts off in the movie essentially as like a double agent who's on the British side. Well, they think he's on their side. But how would a Huron even get to be to being an aide for the British, considering that the Hurons were fairly like publicly aligned with the French?
He must have sold. I mean, you have to assume from what's shown in the movie that he sold the fact that he was Mohawk extremely well, and there really is like there was a ton of misinterpretation and misunderstanding of the complexity of all the alliances, all the tribes. Really, virtually impossible for the British to come in and fully understand who's who and what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
So given that confusion, like, honestly, it's really similar to the confusion that the U.S. had and continues to have in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Where when you've got like lots of little warring subgroups with their own entangling alliances and conflicts, how do you process that? Who do you believe? And just like with Magua, I mean, the U.S. has found itself reading some people wrong, or finding out that what was true at one time was not true in the future. And so it's actually pretty plausible to me that Magua could come in and sell himself as one thing and then pull the switcheroo. You do wonder like, hey, wouldn't some other native, a different tribe or something, recognize this and say something, just like Chingachgook and Uncas and Nathaniel instantly were like, yeah, he's not a Mohawk, he's a Huron. Did that happen? If it happened, who knew? With the chain of command being so strange, which is also really well demonstrated in this film.
Yeah.
Information going upward gets twisted, it gets ignored. You see the things about the settlements and the negotiation. You think, well, this is with General Webb, it will flow downhill from his judgment, but it actually doesn't work that way. Where everybody's operating on their kind of autonomous little thing, and the facts and the truth seem to vary based on that situation. So yeah, could you weasel your way in given that confusion? Absolutely.
Yeah. I kind of figured it was due to that, but I just wanted a little bit of clarification, because obviously the history part of it I'm not too familiar with. And I do like the comparison to the Middle East, because what we know of as like Afghanistan and Iraq and all these Middle Eastern countries, weren't they it's a lot more complex than that, because there's a lot of different ethnicities and different sort of tribes, and those borders were essentially made artificially.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's a very similar situation, I think. It's like when the Americas was being made and the colonies were being made, but within one colony you would have several different tribes, and some tribes would be in several colonies, and just things like that the borders don't exactly really denote anything about the people that are living there, the kinds of people.
They don't. Yeah, they really mean nothing. And this is really the segue into what I think is the super, super important series of themes. In the book, in the film, it's really all about identity, right?
Yeah.
And Cooper was, when he wrote the story, which, by the way, is really awesome. I just love the fact that Cooper was, his father settled central New York, okay, and Cooperstown in the center of the state, which is famous for the Baseball Hall of Fame, really. If anybody's heard of that or seen it on TV.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Cooperstown because it was Cooper's town, right? There's no massively hidden message in there. It's pretty straightforward. And James Fenimore Cooper grew up right there on Otsego Lake. And then when he was young, went into the Navy, where he witnessed the impressment of American sailors by the British, which led to the War of 1812. I mean, he saw that. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because it shows how he might have been thinking a bit mistrustfully of the relationship with the British Empire and how somebody could have processed deferring to their authority, right?
Yeah.
But he, this is 1810s and 1820s. He writes these books for the most part in the 20s and 30s. So he saw a bit of that era as a boy, certainly wasn't around for the French and Indian War. But the themes are still there. There's this constant question then of who are you? Why are you that person? Does it matter? What makes your identity you? And, I'm talking about a bit of New York on this. Mm-hmm. And what it means when you draw an arbitrary boundary. I'm originally from New York.
Yeah.
I don't know. I cannot tell you what a New Yorker is. And I can ask 100 people on the street what a New Yorker is like. 98 of those 100 are going to tell me things about New York City.
Yeah.
The general attitudes of the people who live in New York City. Well, I didn't live there. I've never really been there very much. I've actually spent, I worked this out at one point. I've spent 30 times as much time in Tel Aviv than New York City. I mean, I know nothing about that place, but I guess I'm a New Yorker. Somebody drew a line around a bunch of places, and that makes me a certain thing. Well,
yeah, and it's interesting because when I was looking at colleges, one of the colleges that I think I might have gotten into, because I was looking at colleges up in New England and before I ended up going to Europe, but it was Williams College, which is right sort of where three states meet.
Right.
And it's New York, Massachusetts, and is it Vermont? Are those the three states? It's like and honestly, like you drive around, you can't tell the difference. I mean, because people run in circles around the tri-state area, right there around Williams College, and you honestly can't tell much of a difference. A lot of it was arbitrary, and sometimes I know down here in the South, a lot of it's based on rivers. Like you cross, like when I go to Alabama, I cross a river, and I'm in Alabama, and then I cross a river to go into Mississippi, and that's kind of where all that is demarcated. But I mean, Florida itself, I mean, if you want to talk about weird sort of borders, Florida used to be a lot bigger than it was, and it was because the other states wanted ports. They wanted coastal territory. That's why Alabama and Mississippi now have coastal territory. Florida used to go all the way to Louisiana. And, and you with New York City, it's like me with Miami. When people ask me how much time I've spent in Miami, Miami's a 12 to 14 hour drive from where I live.
Right.
I think I've spent all of 4 days in my whole life in Miami, and I haven't really enjoyed any of those days. I didn't enjoy it at all. I go to Miami, which is in my own state, and I'm like, this is a foreign country. This is not,
That's right.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, South Florida, like, and I honestly don't know why Florida is still like one state when you really think about it, because South Florida is so much different than North Florida. Now, next week, I'm going to Gainesville to hang out with Emp and Rusty. Now, Gainesville
Yep.
is still like North Florida. It still feels very similar to Pensacola. But you start going south of Gainesville, and it's just totally different. And again, I mean, but if you ask 100 people what a Floridian is to them, 99 out of 100 will say someone who's crazy, which might be true. It's
this arbitrary distinction, though, that divorces every bit of your identity and every bit of context in your life from reality for the sake of throwing a label on you. And so when you think about who you are, everybody in this film is thinking about who they are. And, you know, it goes to the romance, too, between Nathaniel and Cora.
Yeah.
So just on arriving, you know, you get these two sisters who are coming from London, and they're excited to be in this new place. And Alice is saying, you know, have you seen the Red Men yet? This is so exciting. And the first thing she says is, I can't wait to go back to London and tell everybody about being in the wilderness. Whereas Cora is taking a completely different approach to all of this. She's seeing something that she did not see in London in terms of mindsets, you know, kind of how everybody's thinking and operating and living. There's an independence and autonomy that seems to excite her. Mm-hmm. And she really embraces that. Well, that really fits conceptually. That fits with how Nathaniel navigates the world. And so these two people are a match. They fall in love very quickly. You know, they're just kind of kindred spirits in that way. Their identities match, even though they're so radically different. Nathaniel being a white man raised by Indians, Cora being, you know, gentry in the UK. Yet they are pretty much on the same plane mentally and emotionally and intellectually and psychologically. That's pretty exciting and interesting, you know. And so I love that as a kind of timeless romance thing, because I think that's how a lot of actual romance works. People match up based on that mindset rather than these weird categories fitting. And you know, Duncan Hayward is trying to marry Cora because it fits on paper.
Yeah.
That perfect match on paper is not a match in reality, and Cora doesn't want it. She's not interested, and she makes that very clear to him. You know, that's a cool thing, but it's a function of her figuring out really what her identity is in this whole thing. And every single person is in this perpetual struggle to find out who they are in this movie. And so the question I want to ask you is Nathaniel an Indian?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Now that I've seen it a few times, he definitely, I mean, I would say he is more than he isn't, because he grew up, you know, he grew up in the tribe, and he, you know, and that is his life, and that is his style of life, and the way that he looks at the world, and the mythology that he ascribes to. I think in the movie they made him half Indian biologically. But
he does explain to Cora in the movie that his parents were killed and he was found by French trappers, and then Chingachgook took him from the trappers. So I thought that implied that he had
white parents.
Parents.
Yeah, I think I just got kind of confused at that part. Yeah, so...
Yeah, it's very murky, yeah. I think it's intentionally murky.
Yeah, and I think that since we don't know... I mean, it implies that he had white parents, but we don't really know. But I think that the Mohicans took him in as one of their own, so he is one of their own, even if he might not look like them, in a sense.
Well, this is why I think the title is wrong on this, and there's no proof historically in Cooper's documents, and like even the things that address this topic, I don't necessarily believe.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and this is just one of those quirks of history where you never really know, and you're not going to know.
Yeah.
You can have an explicit diary from something, and it just may not be the actual truth. And so the only person who ever knew this was Cooper, and he's been gone for some time.
Yeah.
But the end of the film, Chingachgook is saying, I am the last of the Mohicans, because Uncas, his son, is now dead.
Yeah.
And he's considered to be the last, and this is explained in the book, not the movie, because you think, well, go have a child with somebody and there will be more Mohicans. You know, what's the problem? But it's because there are no pure-blooded Mohican women that Uncas or Chingachgook could be with. That's the determination for him, thinking it's impossible for me to actually carry down through a Mohican bloodline. But is he actually the last of the Mohicans? How much does this matter? You've got Chingachgook raising Nathaniel to be indistinguishable from Chingachgook and Uncas.
Yeah.
Every single element of his life is Mohican.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Like I seriously cannot think of one element other than like skin tone that makes him any different from those two men.
Yeah, and even the way that he speaks, his accent sounds like Uncas, you know, like. And I mean, I got to give it to Dina Day-Lewis. I think I only heard the Irish accent come out a little bit, and that was at the water scene where he's telling her, "You need to survive. Do whatever you can to survive." And I noticed just then it was like I hear a little bit of the Irish accent, but otherwise, no, he speaks like a Native American. You know, he doesn't talk like the other Englishmen.
That bit of accent. Even that bit of Irish accent creeping in would have been perfectly legitimate at the time. I mean, English was a weird transition in a weird transitionary period.
Yeah. Well, there's
that era. So,
there's that one island off the coast of, is it Virginia, where it's like the people have this accent that's been there for hundreds of years. It's pretty much left unchanged, but the American accent, as we know it, was different back then, and I think that and the British accent was too, because the British didn't start rolling their R's until the mid 19th century or something like that. So how the British talked back in the 1700s isn't how the British talk now.
Not at all. That BBC English is actually a very modern thing.
Yeah.
And there's some very early recordings from the Edwardian era where people are dropping the G's. So they're saying runnin' instead of running.
Yeah.
Where we think, well, now that's a very informal, casual, kind of lower class thing. It wasn't always like that. And that was right in England. But particularly to this region, which now it's called the Central Leatherstocking region, because this is such a notable story that it's kind of all of the lore of Central New York has been built around the 5 novels in the Last of the Mohicans universe. So it is the Leatherstocking region. But within that, linguistically, it is such a unique thing. There's a guy at San Diego State right now, a linguistics researcher, who's talking about and studying the patterns of language change in that area and how isolated it really is. It has changed. The English used in Central New York has changed at a very different pace, much slower than other parts of New England, Mid-Atlantic, and parts of the U.S. It's a strange amalgamation of Scots-Irish and a bit of German influence. Some of the old British elements that have not changed, and it results in a very unique thing. And so when you apply to this film and you think about the way somebody like Nathaniel is talking, well, he's going to be subject to that same bizarre combination, and certain phrases and sentences and words are just going to pop in a weird way. And so I think that lingering Irish aspect was actually a feature and not a bug when it did creep into some of the lines.
Yeah, and I find all of the how people spoke, back then very interesting, because it also depended upon where they came from. Like, I think the Pilgrims came from the West Country, and that's why a lot of people kind of ascribe the American accent, or the general American accent, as being sort of more from the West Country. But I know that the Southern accent is from like Northern England and Scotland, and it's kind of this weird this kind of how it's progressed down here. But a funny thing is that you won't hear as much of the Southern accent in a place like New Orleans, because it was settled by not just the French but also the Irish, and so the New Orleans accent is almost like the Boston accent in a lot of places in the city. And
Pennsylvania is wild in that same way, because you have such an odd influx of Hanoverians and Prussians and just all of the German and Austrian kind of territories now.
Yeah.
They were distinctly different at the time that Pennsylvania was settled, and the Dutch as well down there. And throw in the modern English, and you get some really unique patterns that come out of places like Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Some unique phrasing and accents. It's really pretty wild how in those areas that have a couple big cities but are generally very sparse, and Central New York is like that, where it's extremely sparse aside for a handful of little cities.
Mm-hmm.
You just get really strange linguistic traditions that vary tremendously. And I'm going to use an example that everybody probably knows, and that's Keemstar. Keemstar and I are the same age. Keemstar and I do not sound the same. We do not talk the same, despite coming up, 4 hours apart in the same kind of woodland, upstate New York area. And if Daniel Keem and I were having this discussion, and somebody said, "Well, where are these two guys from?" They're not going to say that Keem and I are neighbors, but for all intents and purposes, we are. We had the same background, but completely different linguistic influences. And is Keem a New Yorker? I suppose he is. Am I? I suppose I am. I don't know. But thinking about how it applies on to this film.
Oh, hey, sorry. Do you mind if I add Turkey Tom in?
Yeah, go ahead. Hello,
All right.
Thomas.
All right, let me move to Kinokast, Maine. All right, what's up, Tom? We're talking about New England.
Oh, New England, yeah. Well,
We're talking about
in New England.
The linguistic influences on the gentleman and scholar Daniel Keem, as it relates to myself.
Yeah, I mean, upstate New York isn't really New England, though. It's New York.
It's Mid-Atlantic. It's kind of a transition area between Mid-Atlantic and New England. Yeah.
Yeah, I always saw as I know they count Connecticut as New England, but I don't know, only really some of Connecticut is New England. The rest of it's kind of just like New York,
So anyways,
it's not the same. Yeah.
I want to talk about Daniel Day-Lewis and how crazy he prepares for roles. So
Daniel Day-Lewis should play Keemstar. That'd be a good casting.
Well, he already played as a New Yorker, so I would love to see it. But anyway, so Daniel Day-Lewis, for The Last of the Mohicans, had never fired a gun before, and he had only been in independent movies, basically across the pond. So he was in The Name of the Father and My Left Foot, and I think A Room with a View was before this as well. So he was kind of a pansy, and he came over to the States to make a man's movie that is The Last of the Mohicans. And so they got I think it was a drill sergeant to teach, or no, they got some guy from Fort Bragg to teach him wilderness survival And then they got a reenactor who literally was a guy that just lived in the woods and pretended like it was the 1700s to teach him how to live in the woods. And he trained like this for a while, learned how to reload a musket while running and doing all these sorts of things. But people say that Daniel Day-Lewis actually lived in the woods for several months before filming started, and I really doubt that. I don't buy it at all. What they did do, though, that I thought was interesting is they got a drill sergeant to train the soldiers that we see in the movie fighting, and the same guys that play as the British also play as the French. And it was funny because it was like 75 sort of core soldiers that they used, and the drill sergeant said, They told me to make soldiers and not actors. So it was actual like basic training that they put all these people through to teach them the fighting styles of not just the British but also the French. And I thought that was pretty cool. But I want to start wrapping up the last Mohicans discussion and taking it and just sort of taking in callers and just, I guess, turning this more chill. Because I guess the Create Unknown's not happening today, is it?
No. We decided to push. We had some stuff come up for the later afternoon. But can I, before we go into that, can I rage on some of the firearms elements?
Yeah, sure.
Film? So, it's really important. Something they left out completely is Nathaniel having a rifle. Okay?
Yeah.
This is so central to the character. Like, that's why he was named Long Rifle and Hawkeye, because of his marksmanship. Which Hawkeye in the comics universe is based off from this. I think the backstory is that he was impersonating Nathaniel in like a circus show, and that's how he developed his early life. But it's a really difficult thing to shoot what's a pencil in Nathaniel's hands, a Pennsylvania rifle. That's the style, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody had rifles then. Virtually no one had a rifle barrel at all. It was the muskets that everybody else in the film had. They're smooth bore. They're not terribly accurate at all because there's no rifling in that barrel.
Yeah, I've shot some of those.
It's
you don't know where it's going to go. Yeah.
No, you've got like you can point fairly well at like 50 yards, and if you're shooting at a person-sized thing, you've got a pretty good chance of hitting them if you aim carefully. But as soon as you introduce the rifle, you have actual accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
The barrel is so much longer on Nathaniel's rifle because it's a long rifle barrel, so that's shorter smoothbore. And when you're talking about running and loading these things, now this is hard as hell. Okay, this is very difficult to believe in reality. Like you've got to put a patch on that surrounds the ball, so it makes a tight gas seal when the powder explodes and launches the ball. So you got to have a patch, then the ball. You're pushing it down in a very tight fit down a rifle barrel, so it doesn't just slide through. These grooves inside the barrel make that patch kind of cut in, and it's hard. So you've got to pour the powder in, ram that down with the patch, fill the pan on the flintlock that's outside the gun, where the flint is going to spark and ignite that powder, which then ignites the powder inside the barrel. It's a different type of powder most of the time, too. It's a finer grain because it has to fire a little differently. So you'll have fine powder in the flintlock pan and a more coarse powder that's in the barrel. So you'll see the guys with two different powder horns, one small one, which is priming powder, and then a larger one, which is going down the barrel. So this is really complex. You can do it if you're very good. You can do this and fire a well-aimed shot in 20 seconds. But when you're running, this is not an easy thing. and you're depending on the powder in that flintlock pan to still be there in such a way that it can ignite and fire off the powder in the barrel. And so you get these scenes where, you know, he's running and picking up people's guns, from the fallen soldiers and Indians that he's killed, and then using those in his next shot. The odds here that each of those guns were ready to fire perfectly, you know, this is low. It's not like a modern gun where you're going to pick up a revolver and it's got, like, you know, bullets in it ready to go.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic on the action side. Like, this is amazing. But the character of Nathaniel developed the skill of using a long rifle in such an uncommon way that he stood out territory-wide. He's famous for it. Mm-hmm. They never mention this in the film, yet when he talks to the Session at the end to negotiate the fates of Alice and Cora and Hayward, the Session refers to him as Le Long Carabine because he's famous for being long rifle. This is just not part of the movie, but it's a massive part of the character. So the liberties taken with that, there are firearms liberties in movies, but this is a big one. They could have had a little more realism on that.
Yeah, for me, the I guess the least realistic thing with the firearms in the movie is right at the end where he picks up two muskets and he shoots them both at the same time, and he kills both the Indians. And I was like, okay, that's definitely like a Hollywood moment. But
assuming they were ready to go, could you do that running? And when he actually shoots them, he's probably like 15 feet away from each one.
Yeah.
Could you potentially point and shoot from the hip and hit your target there? Yeah, absolutely. But the logistics part is the Hollywood element to me, where he's got to pick up rifles that just happen to be perfectly primed and ready to go. And he just has to cock and pull the trigger and do his thing.
Yeah, and I saw, I don't know, like the ending, it's definitely not realistic in the way that he fights all those guys, but I didn't see it as even trying to be realistic, but this sort of like more like show the emotional intensity of seeing how these people died, and now he's gonna save everyone that he can save. In this big
the only way to keep the
moment.
pace.
Yeah, exactly. Because they have everything kind of intercutting, and it's really building up to that for so long that you have to like keep it up. And what was funny is that last scene was cut sort of in the style of the Celtic music, because the music that they got for the movie was based on some like 1990 Celtic, but contemporary Celtic music, and
it's a very modern amalgamation, which is such a cool choice and such a good fit for that film.
Yeah, because the music is, I mean, it is modern, but it's not based on music that was being made in the Americas at the time. But of course, a lot of American music comes from, a lot of like Celtic music. A lot of our folk songs are literally just almost like reskins of Irish songs, like Johnny I Hardly Knew Ya became Johnny Is Marching Home, and we have a lot of there's a lot of crossover with that. So I thought that was very interesting, and also, I mean, just the score to the film is really great, and it's a very emotional score at the same time, and it uses a lot of repetition, which is big in Celtic music, is like a lot of repetition, and that's how they made that final fight with intercutting the Hurons with Daniel Boone and the Mohicans running, and they're kind of using them running the repetition of those shots and everything like that, and it ends in this kind of explosive way with him just sort of killing as many people as he can to save to save Cora, and something that I didn't understand in the movie, and then I looked into this, is I was wondering, why did Alice throw herself off the cliff? but there was supposed to be a love scene between her and Unka, but the actress's mother wouldn't allow it, and I mean I can understand.
Yeah, and I think there's a scene. So I watched when I rewatched. I watched the director's cut on this, and I think there's a scene of Uncas embracing Alice that was cut out of the theatrical cut. But yeah, there's a hints of romance at it. But even without that, she is so severely traumatized early on in the film, like, and it just gets worse by the minute. Like every scene, she can't handle it, and that's the cool thing to me is that you have these two sisters, and one of them is dealing with it and rising to the occasion and adapting and being very, very strong, and the other is not built for it. She cannot handle any of these things, and progressively gets worse. And the kind of deadness behind her eyes when she sees Uncas get cut down, and she's on the edge of the cliff, she's done. She is absolutely done. And that's kind of the last straw in her psyche, I think. Her ability to handle any of this stuff is gone at that point. And, you know, I referenced this earlier where she arrives in Albany or at Fort Edward. Sorry, and she's all excited to take this story back to London, and she thinks this is kind of, you know, like going to Disney. You know, this is a quirky, wild little vacation. She's going to have a lot of fun and go home with some crazy stories. And when she gets immersed in what this actually is, these brutal individual struggles against everything around you, whether it's the Huron, whether it's the French and British conflict, whether it's just plain the natural world that you talked about, filming in such a way that people are constantly specks in the middle of daunting wilderness. This is reinforced over and over and over, that everybody is a tiny little piece in this sea of God knows what. So you put all this together with like severe physical trauma and murders, and you know your father is killed in front of you, or well, she didn't see it, but by that time she knows he's gone. She's on this cliff, and you know, if the question of what's the point pops into her head, there is no answer, and it's time to hop for her. I actually think she jumps a lot less to do with losing the love interest of Uncas than she cannot handle the world that she is eyeball deep in the middle of.
Yeah, and it's a world that's not made for the weak. I mean, it's really like it is a world only for the strong back then, and even many of the strong didn't even survive it. The strong and the lucky.
This is the identity.
Yeah.
Who are you? And how are you handling the context around you? This is the perpetual struggle, and like I mentioned a while ago, that I think this whole story is extremely relevant right now, because 99% of what everybody is talking about is identity based, and who you are and how does it matter. This is an old question, especially in frontier type areas, where, you know, a lot of Europe hasn't experienced that in a very long time, but the U.S. has had it many times over and over again.
I would say it's been constant in the U.S. because if you ask a person like me, or if you ask most white people, if you ask like, who are you, or what are you, most of them are going to give you their European heritage. They're not going to a lot, because American isn't an ethnicity. It's not, and a lot of our heritage is from Europe. So, you know, you hear a lot of people say, well, I'm like 30% Irish, and I'm English, and I'm German. I mean, that's my makeup, you know, like, yeah, I'll say like, yeah, I'm a mix of like Irish, Norwegian, English, and German. and but it's funny because when you go to Europe, nobody really thinks like that. They don't care about their heritage in that sort of way, because their families, a lot of times their family has lived in Germany for the last thousands of years or hundreds of years or whatever, and it's never really been a question. But it has been a question in America, especially with immigrants coming in and and things like that, and how a lot of immigrants sort of set up their own communities. I mean, the Germans were some of the first to do that because the British didn't really want them around, so they set up their own communities. But the Irish did that too, and the Italians did that, and so then the identity of a lot of Americans centered around where their ancestors came from rather than where they grew up. I mean, but it also goes into the whole thing, like a border in Europe, I think, means a lot more than a border in the States, because what does living in Florida do to change maybe what my ethnicity is or what my personality is or anything like that? It really doesn't do anything. I could easily move to Texas, and I've lived in Texas, and I'm still the same person, and I still fit in over there. And you know what I mean? It's not like the state borders don't dictate who we are in any way, shape, or form, and it doesn't even dictate how we talk. I live in the deep South, but I don't have a Southern accent, and so it's interesting for America, and I think the reason that we have these identity issues in America is because we are a young nation. And I'll get some sort of people who are really pedantic, because it's YouTube. You're always going to get pedantry on YouTube, that are like, well, we're actually older than all the European nations because modern France, I don't know, started in the mid 20th century or something like that, or whatever, like governments. But I'm not talking about governments. I'm talking about nations, and we are very young, and it's a mix of a whole lot of people, and we kind of made all these borders for different reasons within the states, but the state borders don't really affect much, except whether or not you pay state income tax. I mean, at least for me, like if I go across the border in Alabama, then I have to pay state income tax if I'm working there, and that's really the big difference for me.
James Fenimore Cooper was really obsessed with the American identity and celebrating that complexity that you're describing right now.
Yeah.
And he did a fair amount of social critique and political writing in addition to fiction, where he sold this stuff as an asset instead of as a liability, and that shows up in this film, in this character, where I really do wonder if in that final scene, it's almost a setup where you're supposed to listen to Chingachgook saying, "I'm the last of the Mohicans," when you're looking at Nathaniel and knowing that he's there too, that he's taking on every bit of the culture that Chingachgook and Uncas developed with him, right?
Yeah.
And it's, it goes to that age-old question of like, what happens when someone is adopted? Like, how much do genetics matter if you're raised by a family, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how much does it matter? Does it matter at all? And you do get varying answers on this.
That's why
that's the big question.
That's what I guess that's what twin studies are for. Yeah. But it is interesting what you get versus, and I think that part of that reason is why America, more than many, I want to say many other countries, because many other countries does have this sense of individualism, and that has been celebrated. And I think because I think because it's like you have to just, I don't know, rely on yourself for your own identity. And that has been a thing in the States, especially for frontiersmen who literally just lived by themselves, or lived just with their families out in the middle of nowhere on some homestead. where they could be killed at any point by anybody, really, or by anything. I think that
extreme vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think that that's why the American, in American culture, individualism is big, and I think that's also why, if you listen to American folk music, a lot of it is about death, because there's a lot of it back then. It's Will the Circle Be Unbroken and I'll Fly Away. It's all these classic American songs. So, they're about death because that was so prevalent in society, and the whole march out westward. And it's funny because the last Mohicans, what they're looking at the end is the West. That was pretty much the Wild West, but for 1757 was still in New York. We hadn't quite gotten all the way to Utah or Colorado, back then.
He speaks in the film of Kentucky.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a smooth Kentucky at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that stuck out to me, the Kentucky. And I was like, oh, wow. And honestly, I love watching these films that do try to accurately represent that era. I wonder if anyone will make a movie about my town, Pensacola. Oldest city in the U.S. St. Augustine is incorrect. But a lot, in just talking about Pensacola, again, if you want to talk about Indians, if you want to talk about just all the sorts of really complicated politics of the time, Pensacola changed hands I don't know how many times. And in 1722, it changed hands from the Spanish to the French or the British, and the Spanish just burned the whole thing down because they didn't want anybody actually enjoying it. Kind of like what the Russians did to Napoleon in when Napoleon invaded Moscow. But that's a whole different story. But yeah, so anyways, anything else that you want to?
It's totally relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just on that theme and kind of closing up on this is that it's this constant question of, are you defined by group identities and what's happening around you, whether you're in upstate, central New York on the frontier, or whether you're in Pensacola and one day you're Spanish and one day you're not.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're American, and then all sorts of patterns change. Who are you is the big question, and why does it matter? Well, this is my whole Twitter feed is about this question in one way or another. And this film is just the best example to me of how to think about that issue, where Nathaniel's in a struggle of, and Cora and all of them are in a struggle of, am I defined by what's happening around me and my affiliations, or is it who I am and how I want to live?
Yeah.
I see a question in the chat. How do you think the U.S. will deepen its culture and develop a real identity? Well, I don't think I don't think they will, and I don't think they should, and I don't think we ever have. The identity is really a very loose set of basic values, and that's a very good thing. The values of liberalism and democracy, that goes back into Cooper's writing. One of his most famous books was The American Democrat, where he described how those values really should be shared by everybody with complex identities. That's fine, but at the core of it, it's that New Yorker problem. It's that Florida problem.
Yeah.
It's the American problem. It's who are you, and how do you navigate the world in such a way that your identity matters to you and it has a positive effect on everything around you, without that being the driving force. It's a weird push and pull, but that's the push and pull that happened on the frontier. That's the push and pull when you're 1 year old and taken by French trappers, and then the Mohicans raise you, and all of a sudden you're enmeshed in British-French conflict and beautiful women and struggling in the woodlands.
Yeah.
Like, this is it. But it's all values-based. It's all deciding how you live in those circumstances.
Yeah, and it's
really important that they really talk about identity as not being the driving factor on things. It's very important to them. That's why Chingachgook is concerned about being the last of the Mohicans. He's concerned about his people and his bloodline. But, he's got somebody right next to him who does not share that bloodline in any way, but has every bit of Chingachgook in him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and it's and I think that's why the ending where it's looking to the future, and I think that the ending message is that the culture and the identity is not going to be passed down through blood, but through culture, through ideas, rather than through the traditional sort of ethnic means that people assume that the culture is passed down through.
It's going to be in how they live their lives. Absolutely. Yeah. It's not what pops when they 250 years later, their descendants run a 23andMe test.
Yeah.
That's interesting trivia, but it has no bearing on any of this. And they're looking out to the west, as you say on that. They're looking out to the west, and what happens in the west is going to be a reflection of their values and what they do. And that's their real identity. And if the Mohicans want to go forward, it's going to be up to Chingachgook and Nathaniel, not some quirk of genetics.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyways, Tabor, thank you for joining on. I know this is usually my live streams are kind of lowbrow, they're a little bit lower brow than my videos, but this was a nice educational stream. I'll keep this stream up for a time. What I'll do is I'll unlist it and put it into the playlist so that anybody who's interested in watching it can watch it whenever they want. And let me see in the Discord if there are any people who want to come in and anyone want to join. I'll ask people if they want to join in, and we just talk some I don't know who this person is. Okay.
As we wait to see if they pop in, can I ask you a question or two?
Yeah, sure. Ask away.
So if anybody does read any of Last Mohicans or any of Cooper's other books, his writing is really imprecise and it's extremely wordy. So he might take 100 words to describe something that any normal person would take 7 words to describe.
So he's the opposite of Hemingway, basically.
He is that's perfect. He is the absolute opposite of Hemingway. He's never quite right. Mark Twain wrote this really wonderful slam. It's just a scathing expose called Cooper's Literary Offenses. And it's wildly entertaining. It's really funny to read. As quirky as that sounds, that critiquing writing can be funny, but it's hilarious. How he does this massive diss track on how bad Cooper's writing is. Yeah. But I was thinking about it in the context of this film. I know there have been several versions of Last Mohicans dating back to 1910. They did a silent film on Otsego Lake in Cooperstown of this, and then the Randall Scott one in the 30s. There have been several iterations of Last Mohicans. But if you're taking this book that is long, fluid, wordy, imprecise, and you want to turn that into a screenplay, is it a positive thing or a negative thing that it's so fluid and there's so much to work with? Is that going to be easier or harder to turn into the tight story that you want to tell in a film?
Yeah. So with The Last of the Mohicans, that script that they had for the movie, the finished product that we see, I should say, is very tight. Of course, the actual original cut that Michael Mann wanted to release was over 3 hours long. So I haven't read the actual script, but it is a lot longer than what the end product ended up being, but the end product ended up being a very tight film. Everything moves at a fairly fast pace, and there really isn't a scene in the film that doesn't need to be in the film. Everything really works to get us to that final shot. But I have I have my own ideas on like adapting novels, in that I like it when I like it. So it can be really good if there isn't that much to the novel, and then you can expand on that a lot. But I think it's equally as good if there's a lot to the novel and you can sort of just pick and choose what you like. But I think
would you rather adapt a screenplay from that Hemingway style or from the rambling, imprecise Cooper style?
Well, if I'm gonna, I'm not sure, because if I'm gonna be honest, like a movie that would be like my dream project, right? If I could like make any one book into a movie, it would be Blood Meridian. That would be like my dream project. And Cormac McCarthy is very fluid in the way that he writes. He sort of describes everything about a scene. Like he'll talk about the landscapes for pages and pages on end without even like using periods. He says like instead of periods, he just uses conjunctions. So you'll have like these paragraphs of this like super long run-on sentence that goes on for pages in Blood Meridian. But I don't mind it, because what it's doing in my head is just kind of giving me a visual of the situation. But on film, a couple shots could do what several pages does in the book. And I don't know. It depends on the story, because you have a movie like Fantastic Mr. Fox, which I brought up earlier, and that book is super short. And so the book actually is just Act 1 of the movie. So in the movie, Act 2 and 3 were completely not even in the book. They were just written by Wes Anderson and not based on anything from the book. And I think that that's cool. But I don't mind when it's just a pick and choose sort of thing, like with Last Mohicans. Now he actually changed, story elements and things like that. And I don't mind that in movies. I know that a lot of people are like, oh, this director or this movie missed a lot of stuff from the books and stuff like that, or they changed things from the book. Look, when I'm watching a movie, I don't want to have the same experience as reading the book. I mean, maybe I'm weird in that way, but if I want them to be separate experiences, because if I like the general story or like the characters, then I still want to be surprised when I read the book. So I don't mind the changes. But as far as like adapting, I think it honestly just depends upon your own personality, and the way that you work, which one is easier and which one is harder. I'd say that just from basic thinking, I'm trying to just a guess is that it's probably easier if you're picking and choosing rather than having to create something completely new, like was the case with Fantastic Mr. Fox. So I think that if it's just like you're picking and choosing things that you like or you don't like, I think that can be a lot easier. And I think that probably the way that you would adapt it is you take all the characters and all the plot points and everything like that. You'd probably put them into some sort of graph. At least this is how I would do it, like some sort of like graphic. I'm like, okay, so here are all the plot points, blah, 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 blah. What do I want to say with this movie? What am I trying to do with this film? Do I need this plot point in there? If yes, I keep it in. If no, I take it out. This plot point, because with books like this too, there's going to be whole plot points that deal with really just with characterization of a character that you may end up just completely dropping from the script. So then you can get rid of all those plot points if you drop a character. And I think that might be easier. In any case, it's never really easy to adapt a novel into a film, because you're always going to run into people that are critical of your movie because of how you adapted it. and you have to, and you're
Right.
sort of running a thin line with, I want the film to be different enough to justify it, because I don't want it to be like Watchmen, basically, where it's just frame for frame the comic book, and honestly, it's a better experience to read the comic than it is to watch the movie. But it's like, I don't want it to be too distant that that people get mad at me, or that people dislike it because it's not enough like the source material. And it was an interesting take on this is from the French director Robert Bresson. And when he would adapt a novel, he pretty much would take like one thing that he liked out of the novel and then ditch the rest. And it might have been like a sentence, or it might have been the structure. So with Diary of a Country Priest, so with Diary of a Country Priest, he was like, he said, I don't want to adapt any novels because this is how he looked at it, is that a reproduction of another art form is not art. It's like if you take a photo of a painting, if you take out your iPhone, you take a photo of the painting, that photo of the painting is not art. The painting is art, but the photo isn't. I did a live stream about this a couple months ago with Glink. And actually now you're, yeah, so I guess we're, you're close to Glink right now. But in Apocalypse Now. But yeah, so he said, reproduction of another art form is an art, so I don't want to just reproduce a book into cinema, because as an artist, like I won't have a say. So what he did with Diary of a Country Priest, as he said, I like the fact that it's written like it's his journal, and I'm going to use his journal writings to create a rhythm in the film, and really just sort of just taking that aspect of it from the book and doing pretty much whatever he wanted to do otherwise. And it was with Pickpocket, he adapted Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, but it's about a pickpocket in Paris. It's not about Raskolnikov, in St. Petersburg killing a woman. It's about a guy pickpocketing, but it has the same story structure, and it deals with very similar themes. But he didn't want to formally adapt the book, because he still wanted it to stand out on its own. And I think honestly, that's kind of my favorite way. And a lot of my favorite movies that are adaptations of novels stray from those in a lot of ways. If somebody brought up Blade Runner and Apocalypse Now, like I read Heart of Darkness by Conrad, and now Heart of Darkness is it's a novella, because it's not that long. But Heart of Darkness is a great book, and it made total sense to adapt it to Vietnam. And they were able to contemporize a lot of the themes and the story to 1970s America, because honestly, there was a TV adaptation made of Heart of Darkness in the 80s by Nicholas Roeg, but obviously it didn't strike. It wasn't as striking to people as Apocalypse Now, because Heart of Darkness, as great as it is, the social themes that it really touches on are social themes for late 19th century, early 20th century England, and so that's not going to resonate with audiences in the 80s. And right. I think that, when you're looking at adaptations, there are a lot of ways to go about it, and I think that it's, no matter what you're doing, you're walking a tightrope. Because in the cases of, I think the cases of adaptations where audiences would get really ticked off if they weren't exactly when they left stuff out from the books was Harry Potter, because the fans for that were sort of rabid, and they get mad at Order of the Phoenix because it's an 800-page book, and the movie's like 2 hours long, or it's almost 3 hours long, but it's like, come on, it's
only a portion.
Yeah, it's like, it's a 2.5 hour long movie, but you can't fit a whole book into a 2.5 hour long movie.
No.
So
I have a follow up on the adaptations though. because I do want to hear, I do want to know what you think about what it's like to make something that's been made dozens of times before. Like, there are very few books that have been made and remade into so many different types of media, from films to radio plays to just, if it's possible to make media out of it. Last Mohicans has been done in several different countries for each form of media.
Same with like Tarzan.
Yeah, there are a handful of things that are just, they've been done like literally hundreds of times. What's that like when you're Michael Mann and it's like 1990 and this comes across your desk and you decide you want to make it? How do you approach that when you're like the 80th edition of the same cover song? Like, how does that feel? And what are the challenges on that?
I think that so Michael Mann had already sort of made a name for himself, especially with his film Thief, which I think came out in 1980, 81, something like that. But he was kind of hot stuff at that time, and he hadn't released Heat yet, which is maybe my favorite of his movies. But I think that when he was approached about doing Last Mohicans, and I'm not going to speak for Michael Mann, but I'll just try to put myself in his shoes and just sort of have a little thought experiment here on what I would think. Is, first of all, before I would even do the project, I would have to look at the project and say, I would say, how does this, I would say, can I see my voice in this project? Because if I can't see my own voice coming through in this project, and when you're a creative, when you're a writer, especially, people come at you all the time saying like, oh, I've got a really good story for you. You should really do a story on this. You should really write a script about this, and and all that, and all that sort of stuff. And I always tell people, I'm like, you know what? If you really think that story should be written, you should write it yourself, because it needs to feel natural to me, at least. If I'm gonna make anything, it needs, the story needs to feel like it's naturally coming from me. And I think that if you can find it in the story where you're like, all right, my voice can come through, or this feels like something I naturally would do, I think that the film itself is going to be different than the other movies that came before it, because you are approaching it as your own project, and it might have been made before, but it's never been made by you, and with the way that you make things and the way that you shoot things, and and the way that you edit and stuff like that. And so I think that that's something that's very important. But I also think with Michael Mann, what he was also doing is he probably saw it as a way to update it, because the movie that had came before that he had seen as a kid and he was a big fan of was the 1936 version of the movie that was in black and white and a 4:3 aspect ratio, and obviously was using technology from the 30s. And I think that what Michael Mann thought is, I can update this movie with a big Hollywood budget. I can make it as authentic as possible. And this won't just be The Last Mohicans. This will be a realistic look into how people in 1757 New York lived. And I think that that was also, for me, if I was him, that would be something that would definitely draw me to the project to want to remake it, because it's like, okay, now I've got $100 million, or I don't know, however much they spent to make the movie, $50 million or something like that. I can really do this interesting thing that hasn't been done in a movie before. And Michael Mann has his own way of directing things that I think it's obviously a compelling way of directing things, because people still watch his movies decades later. And and that's just kind of how I would approach it, is I know that if I looked at something that had been done before, before me, but if I knew that this is a kind of story that I would naturally tell, I would find something within that story to latch onto, to tell in my own way. And I think that with Michael Mann, if I'm trying to think of like what he latched onto, I think he latched onto the historical realism, as far as, as historical realist you can get with a Hollywood picture, because obviously it's never gonna be quite the same. But I think he latched onto that. I think he also latched onto the romance, because he does.
Do you think this can be? Oh, sorry. Go on.
Yeah, and I definitely think The Last Mohicans, with a different director, with a differerent writer, can be retold in a much different way.
Yeah. Can this be done again? I've seen the movie from '36, and it's what you'd expect from a movie in 1936, and it's okay. But they had such limitations; they had to stick to different elements and tell it a different way. But can this be redone and have it be better than better for the time? Surely, but I mean, can it be redone and improved? And if you did this, like, what would you seize on? If you get the budget tomorrow to start doing this, what do you seize on to make this different in 2020, in your 2020 remake of Last Mohican?
And my 2020 remake, I would make it, it would be in space. The final frontier.
You desperately want that Dune situation to happen to you, don't you?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, hey, David Lynch made Blue Velvet right after making Dune, so maybe that's how I get my Blue Velvet made, is I make my Dune. No, if I was, honestly, I don't know if I would. Now, if they offer me a lot of money to do it, I might really consider it. But with a story like Last of the Mohicans, I don't know if I would grasp onto it as much as I would, or I would try to adapt it, or I'd take the very general story and try to adapt it to, the Postal Man is here. Wait a hey, how's it going? You can just drop that anywhere. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
No problem. If I was to adapt it, I would probably take the general story, but try to change the setting. Because, I mean...
And is there a setting that pops out? Because this is the wall that I hit. Like, I've thought so specifically about this area and its people and this story and Cooper's origins on it and how the mythology has played out in the 200 years since. I am so confined to the reality of the Last Mohicans universe that I cannot think how to do it different. Like I am incapable of being visionary on this and thinking, well, what setting could you translate it to? And I know it's there, like it's a transferable story. So as somebody who writes and directs and thinks of it in those terms, where would you take this?
So what I would do first, before even considering taking it anywhere, is I would boil it down to its most basic elements and say, like, what is the most basic story here? And it is a man who's half native, half white, or honestly it could be just half native to any land, to whatever land they're on, and half of the invading forces or conquering forces, or foreign. And a man who is like that, who is very skilled at surviving in this land, is kind of helping these people who aren't from there, these vulnerable people, really, navigate a war and helping them navigate to safety. And actually, when I was watching Last of the Mohicans, a movie I was reminded of was The Hidden Fortress by Akira Kurosawa. I was sort of reminded of that. That the Nathaniel Boone character, Hawkeye, did like this the structure of having Nathaniel Boone. Someone says this is really just Dances with Wolves. Yeah.
There's some common elements,
Yeah.
with identity, absolutely. But that's Kevin Costner developing into something rather than being something from the beginning. But it's a very similar story.
Yeah, and I would say that this it's a story of somebody who was half one thing, half another, navigating through conflict with both halves. And I think that you can really transfer that to any setting where there is major conflict, major political conflict between several different factions, and that I think that's sort of an important thing, and where the identity of those factions are created by their identity. And I think that the Wild West I think it would really easily transfer to the Wild West. But apocalyptic is the Wild West. Apocalyptic is just the Western with sci-fi paint, really. And so I think it could be, transferred to that. Now, yeah.
Can you write an adaptation about a very charming, handsome New York man who has a conflicted identity in many ways, and there's Keemstar is the equivalent of Magua. Can you write this up and we can make a really good YouTube life film?
Okay, so I'm gonna make so somebody talked about Little Big Man in the chat. I do like Little Big Man. That's a good movie. But the YouTuber version of this, so we have to have someone who's half and half, right? All right, so I'm not a commentary channel. I'm not a drama channel. Even though my last video I get canceled and then I'm putting on makeup, which I did because it was like every beauty YouTuber is getting canceled. I was like, all right, why don't I make a video where I get canceled and I'm like doing like a parody of beauty YouTubers. But whatever. So Keemstar, we don't quite know his ethnicity, right? I mean, he's kind of
right.
He's somewhere. So
he's the pride of Buffalo, and that is the extent of it.
Yeah. So he's all right. So if he's Magua, I'm not gonna say that H3H3 is gonna be Nathaniel Boone. It's yeah.
I will cancel. I will do everything possible to cancel this project if you take Nathaniel and turn him into H3H3. I refuse to allow this to happen to my life.
We gotta find someone similar. Okay, where are those charts? Those how they have those like commentary, like who's friendly.
The tier list?
No, but who's friendly? Like there was a new thing. It's like who's friendly with each other, who hates each other. It was like all made in MS Paint, and it's a graph that honestly is just like
it's impossible to determine where the lines go.
Yeah, because there's just so many lines, you don't really know. Okay, gosh, I don't even know who would be the Nathaniel Boone. You know what? H3 could be the British guy that gets burned.
If we think of who Daniel Day-Lewis was when this movie popped, he wasn't who he is today, right? In terms of his career, we need to find a nice young remote. Charming YouTuber who, does his own thing. He's quite independent, but still walks in two different worlds. I think we need John Swan with the intercontinental element here. John Swan is our hero, and Keemstar is our Magua.
And this is going to work. And they're fighting over a woman, and the guy that he could be fighting with is H3 maybe
that will work. Yeah. When the proxy for the romantic interest is really fighting over the kind of right to criticize the monopoly on criticizing another party, this can work.
And so who should be the head of the French in this case? And I'm thinking Like who gives Keemstar the go ahead to go after them? Maybe the woman is Basher.
I'm thinking bigger. I'm thinking that I'm thinking it's Susan.
Oh yes, Susan Washkiki. Oh yeah, that's the woman they're fighting over. The woman they're fighting over is Susan Washkiki.
Oh, okay.
That's Cora.
Yeah, I'll take that. That's better.
Cora. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or however
I like that.
However you say it. Uncas can be BG Cumby. I'm just always gonna cast him somewhere. No, actually, it'd be funny if BG Cumby was the British guy, because he's always trying to bull up on Susan Washkiki.
That would be a good fit.
Yeah. Okay, so
the woman is Onision. Oh Lord, that would be a complex element.
Onision is somewhere there. Onision is the cougar that they see in the forest in that one shot, just lurking.
In the novel, you mentioned earlier about having the freedom to cut out a central character to make the plot move forward. In the novel, there is a weird character who's a singing teacher who travels with the party. He's absolutely central to it. Like, he's a massive character to cut out of the movie. But he's a singing teacher who's really weird. He's kind of a wild card, and the situations he gets himself in are really bizarre, and it's that wild card Onision element. So if you throw that character back in, there's a whole range of outlandish YouTubers you can throw into that role.
Oh yeah, Onision or Basherverse.
Basherverse would fit just fine there.
And then what would bring everything together is that if the film was narrated by the gamer from Mars internet.
This is viable. It's terrible, but it's viable. I don't see any insurmountable hurdles on this idea.
Monroe is PewDiePie. I think that's good. The General Monroe, and what Keemstar does is he cancels him. He hashtag deplatform, or maybe it's J Station, because he actually
if there's Keem, if you make I'm Alex Monroe.
I'm Alex.
Seething blood libel that that Keemstar would feel toward Colonel Alex would be Colonel Elmsley would be.
It'll just be like this.
Hot blood running through Keemstar.
But the thing is that I just could not imagine I'm Alex in all of his grand stature commanding an army.
He's got an army of stands. When I think about armies, honestly, I'm Alex would have thousands of troops at the ready within 24 hours of a tweet.
Yeah, but the thing is that Monroe didn't get the reinforcements.
No, so that's why I'm Alex is calling for reinforcements from the E-Boys, particularly James Marriott. And then Marriott tweets back, like, you're on your own, mate.
Yeah, Marriott's still mad about Einabber not being in the E-Boys. So he's like... So then who would be the French general that pretty much gives Keem the go-ahead in attacking everyone there? Who's like
That's
really
tough.
Yeah, who's like really cool with Keemstar that would be like, yeah, you should probably just take out.
I think it's the CEO of FaZe. I think you actually go off the on-screen talent roster on this one, and it's actually like a decision maker and string puller on the corporate side.
Yeah, G Fuel.
That would fit.
Well, it wouldn't be G Fuel
Spencer mentions in the chat iDubbbz. I don't know what role iDubbbz can be on this, but he has to be a part of it.
Well, I mean, I guess iDubbbz could be the guy that can't get the girl, right?
Oh Lord! Oh.
He's the guy simping for Cora.
Oh. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to think about that. But I also know that he would just slam that role so hard that it would be amazing.
Low blow.
Yeah,
I mean,
low blow. I agree. I have a pit in my stomach just discussing this. I love him so deeply.
But I mean, he's kind of embraced the meme. I mean, he goes by Homo Simpian on Twitter, so I think that
the best screen name on the entire platform.
Yeah, so I don't feel too bad about it, but because of that, if he was like really upset at the meme, I think that I wouldn't have gone for it. But so Matthew Tabor is a peasant on the side of the road. Oof.
Yeah.
No one loves him and throws dirt at him.
I think that the best I can do is be the equivalent of the homesteader who gets murdered and his cabin burned down. Which that's the guy. I can't think of his name. There are actually a lot of roles, by the way, real quick. There are a lot of roles that have people who you see later. And he was the guy who ran the prison in Oz. He ran Emerald City in the HBO Oz series.
Oh, okay.
I think his name is Timothy something, but that was one of his early roles. When they call the levy for the militia, the guy doing that and having the exchange with the crowd with Nathaniel and Jack Winthrop, that's Lane from Mad Men. The British guy.
Okay. Yeah, I recognize a lot of the actors in there as being
Pete
sort of
Postlethwaite.
younger. Yeah, Pete Postlethwaite.
Pete Postlethwaite. He pops in the Siege. But yeah, there are a couple people who we see later on in such prominent roles who just are peppered in, and of course Wes Studi has been.
Wes Studi's been a bunch.
He's been one of the most ever-present multi-tribe actors in American cinema. I mean, he's been in so many fantastic movies.
Yeah, I'm just looking up.
But yeah, there are a bunch of hidden
right
gems
now.
in there.
Wes Studi. I'm looking up his. I'm looking up Wes Studi's IMDb right now, just to kind of read out some of the. Yeah,
he's had so many roles.
He was in Mystery Men.
Yeah.
Yeah, AKA the movie that was turned into the music video for All Star by Smash Mouth.
His career has been all over the place. He absolutely is amazing.
Oh yeah, he was in Hostels as well a couple of years ago.
Yes. With Christian Bale.
Yeah, Christian Bale.
Yep.
Yeah, and then he was in the best Western ever made, which is A Million Ways to Die in the West. And
I dispute that, but yeah.
He was in Avatar, which is Dancing with Wolves, Pocahontas in space. He was in The New World, the movie that I was telling you about, the Terrence Malick movie that I really like. I think it's underrated.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Kevin is the tree. Someone says Kevin is the tree, and Tabor is the moss on the tree.
Wow.
What
a condemnation of my entire career in existence. We've talked for so long about identity, and you just waffle stomped mine in the shower.
Yeah, Spencer Braithwaite, you're not being very nice. Monsieur Chinchilla says a nut tree to be exact. Now I wonder where does the Kino corner factor into this, because it seems like my whole personality couldn't even develop until about the 1890s when cinema was invented. But in this YouTuber...
you'd have to be an artisan. Yeah, you'd have to be... I mean, there's always room for an artisan of sorts, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I'd be the painter, I guess. That's how things were recorded.
But in this YouTube adaptation, that's all art and media based. I mean,
yeah, I'd be behind the camera.
There's got to be a unifying character, and there are several in Last of the Mohicans, but that character who touches on all of the different worlds. That's the perfect role for where you're at, because you do hit all of these people on different levels. So you can be that hub of their experience.
Yes, I guess that is true. Stan Tabor. Wait, Kino's personality is way different on Twitter. No, it's not. I have the same personality.
It doesn't seem sufficiently different to me.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you go to my Discord. No, I'm about 40% serious 100% of the time. Now what I did is I did distance myself from my Twitter trolling.
It's a difficult decision.
Yeah, what I did is I just created an alt account. So you might see
That's
that
probably the best way.
Yeah, because I think that people have been seeing a lot of my trolling on Twitter. I was doing this far before I had a YouTube, by the way. I have personally met Moot from 4chan. I have been a troll for at least a decade. And yeah, my personality is I think the same here as it is on Twitter. I just don't like to take myself too seriously, but I'm always curious, intellectually curious, I guess, which is probably why I'm friends with you. I think Vsauce is the same way. Like, Vsauce always came across to me as like curious, but not up their own asses.
Yeah, and that's a function of those guys not being like traditional like academics in those fields. It's a really good mix of like insider and outsider, where it's taking that curiosity and mashing it up against the hard topics. But you know, they're not they're not doing dissertations on any of those topics and haven't. And it's the same way in different fashions. For Michael, Kevin, and Jake, they all have radically different personalities, you know. But the unifying thing is that curiosity, and it's really important.
Curiosity box.
Yeah, right. They built that
subscription
box around that mindset, right? Where it's kind of rubbing up a normal person's curiosity against really difficult subjects. And that up your own ass feeling, you're like, you know, that's a crude way to put it, but it's perfect. That's the thing that, like, people don't want that. You know, they're a bunch of very, very smart people in all subjects. And they can deliver fantastic knowledge. And, you know, this has turned me off from a lot of film, cinema, etc. analysis, because I don't like any of that.
Yeah.
You know, I like the way you do things because it's that same style of, I want to hit this pretty deeply. I want to be serious about this, but I don't want to be a wiener about it. Like, I want to be a normal guy who like you want to hang around with and talk about this stuff with. That is kind of a pretty strong correlation with success in all fields, in my opinion, where it's like, be serious, hit something hard, and just be somebody that you want to sit down and talk to. And that strain is through Vsauce, it's through the Create Unknown, it's through what you do. I like it.
Yeah, and so, you know, it's just my whole idea on YouTube is that people, like, my philosophy is that people come for my personality and they stay to hear what I want to hear. Agreed with Matt on this about Kino. And so I have an idea. So this is actually something I wanted to do for a while, but I want to leave it up to you and Kevin, maybe. I've always wanted to make a parody video of Vsauce.
Okay.
So, but in the style, because I've been watching Vsauce since when Vsauce was like starting out. One of my teachers in high school got me into Dong way back in the day. And so currently Ding.
When you say Dong, I don't know what you're talking about, because Dong has never existed. It's always been the family-friendly Ding.
Do online now, guy. I don't know. I never really got what the G was for. I just always remember do online now. I was like, okay, and that was
that's guys. Yeah, so
guys,
do online now, guys. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. So I've been watching Vsauce since then. Big fan of Minefield. I love that show.
Yep.
And I've been watching, Vsauce2 and Vsauce3. I really like how each show is different. That Vsauce2, I watch it. It's more like more math-related stuff, I guess, and probability and sort of thought experiments and that sort of thing. And then Vsauce3, I really do like Vsauce3 because he does touch on more like movie stuff. So of course I would say that the only movie channels that I watch on YouTube would be Red Letter Media and Vsauce3. I think that those are the only film channels I watch. If you can even consider, Vsauce3 is sort of a film channel, but it's more like science of film and stuff. But I find that stuff cool, and it's not like some guys like, 12th grade essay about what a film means or something like that. But
right, his "Could You Survive the Movie" series, where he's looking at Mad Max, Back to the Future,
and
Ghostbusters,
Alien,
and
Home
Alien.
Alone.
I
like the Home Alone one too.
Right?
Yeah, that was a good one. But one of the things, so the other thing that I've noticed is sort of prevalent through all the Vsauces, and this is kind of what I would parody in my video, is how it's delivered vocally. How they have these pauses where you wouldn't really put a pause. I'm trying to think of a sentence that would be. It's something like I would know it if I heard it. But Michael, Kevin, and Jake all do this. But it's like, but what if this, or it's something like that. It's like this. There is this and I was trying to think of because with Michael's videos and with Kevin's videos, it's really just their faces that you're looking at, but the way that they talk is different than how you would talk normally. It's definitely like a put on sort of performance, but it's very engaging with the cadence of it. So that's probably what I would parody. But if you have a movie that I'll leave you up to requesting something, and I'll try my best to parody. I'll get a big whiteboard, and I'll put that on a table, and then I'll get some colored lights. I just cleared up a little studio space so I can. If you want me to parody the Vsauce2, that would actually be kind of
that blue pink aesthetic.
The blue pink, the Justin Wang aesthetic.
I've got the Wang Gang shirt on right now.
Yeah,
I know I'm not in video on that stream, but I love this shirt. It's just it's gotten to like the front of my lineup. I wear this all the time now because I love the colors on it.
Yeah, it's like the vaporwave colors. It's like the Drive aesthetic, the sort of the 80s throwback style, neon. Yeah, and it's not a hard aesthetic to get, but I've always been. I kind of like, with my channel now that we're coming at 2.5 hours, I'll cap it at 2 hours and 30 minutes, so that's in 7 minutes.
Cool.
But with my channel, it's always been sort of like, I don't know how you are, how a lot of people are, but I get bored when I'm making the same kind of video over and over again. And I know that a lot of my subscribers, they do like my video essays. They do like it when I take these clips from movies and I put them in. But in the process of making it, it's always the same. No matter what movie I'm talking about, the process is always the same. I write the script. I go to my little sound booth. I record the audio, and then I edit the audio down to where it needs to be, and then I take the clips and I put them in, and then that's it. And so the process is the same no matter what I'm talking about or what the movie is. The only thing that really changes is the writing of it. And so I was finding myself saying, well, I have a lot more fun writing it because each time I'm writing it, it's about a different film, and that's the most fun, and then everything after that's tedious. So then I started saying, well, I want to start shooting my own stuff. I want to start not necessarily doing skits, but I guess doing more of the Vsauce type stuff where it's like I'm just talking to the camera, but in like out of context places. I even did it in my, if you watch my Truman Show video, I even do the Michael sort of pop into camera thing. I think where I'm like below the camera and I like pop into view.
And I know a lot of people think like you've got to have this kind of cinematic masterpiece on a YouTube video to make it something that somebody want to stick through and see, especially if it's on the longer side. If it's 18, 20 minutes. Yeah. This has to be kind of an epic thing, and it doesn't have to be that way. And looking at some of Michael's videos, especially some of his best ones and most popular, I rewatched one a couple weeks ago that was maybe 5 years old, and it is 95% his profile, like it's like my profile picture where it's like shoulders up. And he's talking about stuff, and the cadence that he's got, the layering of information that he has is so accessible and so friendly that all of a sudden this 17-minute video is over.
Well, I mean, think about like how many YouTubers basically just ramble on for 20 minutes, but I mean, one person
perfectly engaging.
Yeah, like one person that's easy. It's really just about being easy to listen to. Like I will listen to like It's a Gundam because he's entertaining to listen to, even if he gets some stuff wrong or whatever. It doesn't really matter because it's kind of like, I know Glink is making that video on parasocial relationships, or he made that video. I'm not sure if he uploaded it yet. I haven't been too active on YouTube just because I've been editing, but it is a sort of parasocial relationship where it's like a lot of times when a person wants to watch a YouTube video, they don't care about the whole cinematic experience of it. They care about feeling like a real person on the other side is talking to them, and is a person that they find interesting and not boring. Interesting to listen to and has interesting things to say as well. I mean, you can, but then I don't understand.
I've talked to so many like new and aspiring creators, and some already at a very good point where they there's this tremendous pressure that they feel to do this visually stunning thing or do a unique thing, whatever, and it's very hard to get them to understand like, hey man, you're awesome. I like talking to you. I like listening to you. So does everybody else. Yeah. This is enough. Like, you can be yourself and put that out there, and it's going to be great. You just don't need necessarily to make it more complex than that. It's hard to have confidence that you're awesome. It's this weird narcissism to be like, hey, I'm actually so cool and engaging that I can hit the on button and people are going to love me. But at the same time, that's actually true for a lot of people, and they need to understand and embrace that. If you are enough most of the time.
Yeah, and I think that YouTube, I think that social media, being a creator on social media, you can have a muddied view of it because of comments, especially if if you're like me and you read all the comments, and you get a lot of negativity in the comments, but you also have to sort of realize that the people who have a positive view on you, if they like what you're doing, they probably won't leave a comment, and it's just like a lot of people.
I never do.
Yeah, it's like you're getting.
I've left like 5 comments in like 12 years of doing YouTube stuff. Like, I love a bunch of stuff.
I really only ever comment on my friends' videos, like if to meme on them or something like that. That's pretty much the only time I ever comment. So you have to also sort of take into account that like you're not going to please everyone, but the people that really are leaving those comments, they are a minority. So you really shouldn't let it get to you. And with YouTube, it's more about just the personality. It's supposed to be broadcast yourself, right? but that's why like my Joker video is much different than any of my other videos, and I knew that it was going to be a bit more controversial because it's different. But I just knew that creatively, I would go crazy if I kept on making the same style, the same thing over and over again.
This is the theme. This is the theme for all of today. Is that identity thing? Let it be you. Let you and your values show through, and that is enough.
Yeah, I would say so.
Like,
and I think
in a
that's
quirky way, it applies to all of this stuff.
I'd say so. Yeah, it's a constant battle that we're having internally and externally, and I'm the Joker, baby. You know how I got these scars? I'm the Joker, baby. And yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Tabor, for coming on, and hopefully we can do this another time. And let me know, because I actually did just clear out a whole bunch of studio space, so I have a bit more room than being confined to the Kino corner. I'm no longer just in the corner. I can do a proper parody, and I would love to, because I also just, when I made short films, so I'd love to emulate different directors and stuff like that. So just kind of bringing that in. I'm going to try to parody a few different YouTubers in different videos. And so Joker was, I guess, the beginning of that with the beauty YouTubers. It's a
That's
joke.
awesome. I like that idea, and I do hope that we can talk again about a less heady to me film. Like I'm sorry that I gave you an onslaught of things like geography and whatever on this one, and so I would love to take something like Over the Top and talk about how important it is to arm wrestle to get back the love of your son in a fine truck. That would be a nice lowbrow counteracting piece.
Or possibly the classic Roadhouse. And how it's
I don't like that movie. I don't like Roadhouse. I hate Roadhouse.
Yeah.
No, I know everybody loves it, but it's not for me. Sam Elliott's cool, but that's...
No,
I don't like that.
So we won't get into it, but what ruined Roadhouse for me was the woman is not a doctor. Like, there's no way that woman is a doctor. I was like, come on. I was like, I can look into her eyes and know that she's not a doctor. Kim Jong-un, why do you hate Roadhouse? That we will save that for a different time. We are at 2.5 hours, and so I'm ending it here. Thank you, Matt, for coming on, and hopefully we can do this another time. In August, I'll probably be doing some more streams, because I'm going to be working on releasing my movie, and so I won't have as much time to make actual videos, but I will be doing some streams. And I'm hoping what we can do, something that I've wanted to do, and if you are interested, something I've wanted to do is akin to internet blood sports, if you ever were a part of that, but for movies, where I get somebody on that absolutely loves the movie and get somebody else on that absolutely hates the movie, and they argue.
Oh, I like that.
They argue. So if you hate Roadhouse, I'll try to find somebody who loves Roadhouse, and maybe we can do that. I think that could be fun.
Yeah. I'd love to come up with a list of movies that I hate. There must be probably 5. I mean, Roadhouse is tough because I hate it so much that I don't even care about it.
Yeah.
It's insignificant. Like it doesn't even exist to me. But there are some that exist, and I don't like them.
All right.
So yeah, I like that. I love that idea.
I have some movies that I hate too, and I'll leave those here for some people, for them to chew on.
Excellent.
Because they're movies that are fairly popular. I really did hate The Florida Project, which I know was critically loved, and I kind of hate Casablanca, and I know a lot of people love it, but I do not get it at all. I don't understand the love. I thought it was kind of trash. Same with The Last House on the Left. I watched that the other night. So many people love that movie. I don't get it. There's just a lot of movies I don't know. I actually thought about doing a video on how it's okay to dislike good movies, and and how it's okay to like bad movies in the sense of
That would be a good video. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. I mean, like, look, Over the Top is a terrible movie in every possible way, but it's okay for me to like that.
yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah, that's a good topic.
probably the movie I've seen the most in my whole life is Kung Pao Enter the Fist, and that
I've
is
seen Rocky IV well over 100 times.
yeah. But anyways, I'll end it there. We're gonna keep on talking because
Cool.
we're both talkers. So I'll end it there. Thank you, Matt, for coming on, and thanks everyone who
Thank you
tuned
for
in.
having me on this.
And if you are watching this sometime in the distant future, thank you for giving me that sweet ad revenue. So
Excellent.
so I will see you all later, and we are
Cool.
ended.